Hi, everyone. My theme is going to be the side of the police that we don't see. I was rather flattered recently to get an email from a detective constable saying that he'd spotted a burglar and had chased him for a mile across Brighton. Rugby tackled him and handcuffed him. And as he took him up to the custody centre at Hollingbury, the villain turned to him and said, "You know, you're just like a cop in a Peter James novel." My interest in the world of the police began back in 1981. I'd recently got married, and my first novel had just been published, and we got burgled. Now, I can strongly recommend getting burgled soon after you've got married. It gives you a wonderful excuse to explain why all those horrible wedding presents. Auntie, you know, that porcelain donkey with the quartz clock in its stomach. They took it. A young detective came to the house to take fingerprints, and he spotted my book, and he said, "Oh, if you ever want any research help with the police, give me a call." And he was married to a police officer, and my wife and I became friends. They invited us to a boxing fight, a police social night, a barbecue at their house. And almost all of their friends were also police officers, which is very usual. Traffic officers, response, police divers, firearms, soccos, etc. I found their world fascinating, and I began to realize, as a writer, that nobody sees more of human life in a 30-year career than a cop. At first, knowing I was a writer, many of the police officers were suspicious. Their relationship with the press and public can at times be very uneasy. I remember a couple of years ago, I was out spending a day on patrol in Islington in London, and I was with a sergeant and a constable, and the sergeant was limping. And I said, "Oh, how'd you hurt your foot?" And we were sitting in a patrol car, and he pointed at a building society. He said, "Well, it happened just over there. 8 months ago," he said, "we saw 3 blokes running out with masks over their faces. Didn't look good to us." You can never accuse Plod of not being smart. They saw us, and they legged it off the other way, so we jumped out and gave chase. One of them turned round with a machine pistol. So we hit the deck. They carried on running. I thought, I'm not having that. So I got up and gave chase, and I was yelling, "Stop, police!" And they split 3 ways. Rather stupidly, I went after the one with the gun. Went down a side street. He suddenly turned back to me, pointed the gun at the pavement, and fired. The bullet ricocheted straight into my right knee. I was in the worst agony of my life. I was rolling around on the pavement, effing and blinding my head off. 2 days later, an elderly, very smartly dressed lady walked into Islington Police Station. She said, "I wish to make a complaint about a police officer using foul language." It was explained to her this unarmed officer had been shot whilst very bravely chasing a man with a machine pistol. "That's all very well," she said. "There was no need for him to have used profanities." When the police officers I'd met and had befriended began to realize that I was genuinely interested in their world and not out just to get a quick story I could sell to a paper, they began over time to trust me and started inviting me out on patrol or to spend a day in an office. And it developed to the point where they would invite me along to crime scenes and even call me and ask if I'd like to accompany them on a raid. To give you an example of the variety of the work, a single day I spent recently with a response crew here in Brighton. It began at 7 a.m. with a terrible tragedy. A couple's 3-month-old baby had died during the night. The attending officers had to give pastoral care, and yet at the same time be mindful that it was a possible crime scene that might need investigation. At 9 a.m., we had a 999 call from a woman saying her live-in boyfriend had just pushed dog feces into her mouth. We got up to this house, a very nice house in a nice part of town. She was an intelligent woman in her mid-40s, and the woman police officer said, "We have Peter James, the author, with us. would you rather he stayed outside or would you mind if he came in? And she said, no, it'd be fine if he came in. So I sat with them while they interviewed her. And the officer said, this sod has done this 3 times to you in the last 18 months. Why didn't you just throw him out? And she pointed at the wall, and there was a huge fish tank. She said, well, we've got 5,000 pounds worth of tropical fish in there, and he's the only one who knows how to clean it. I said, have you thought about sushi? Which made her smile. As we were leaving, the woman officer said to me, she said, you know, everybody finds an excuse not to leave. At 11 o'clock, we ended up at home of an elderly couple who'd just been swindled out of their life savings and were distraught. At midday, a Turkish student was hit by a bus in the middle of Brighton. The paramedics thought he was going to die. His girlfriend didn't speak a word of English. They had to find a translator, try and comfort her. Fortunately, he survived with less bad injuries than they'd thought. At 6 o'clock, we got called, another 999 call, by a terrified 7-year-old girl saying Mummy and Daddy are killing each other. And we got to this house, and the wife had 2 black eyes, the husband had blood pouring out of his nose, and a gash across his forehead. And what was it about? Well, in the husband's word, I wanted to barbecue the beef, but the bitch put it in the oven. The kind of dark side of life is out there all the time for police officers. Back in 1996, I was introduced to a young detective called Dave Gaylor. And I remember walking to his office, and it was a complete tip. It was piled high with blue and green plastic crates bulging with folders. And I could just see his head appearing at the back. And I said, are you moving? He said, no, these are my dead friends. I thought, great, I have met the only weirdo in Sussex CID. And he then explained, he said, I'm a homicide detective. I've just been tasked with reopening all the unsolved murders in the city of Brighton, applying the latest forensics to them to see if we can bring them any further forward. He said, each one of these is the principal case file of an unsolved murder. I am the last chance each victim has for justice and that their families have for closure. And I loved that very human image about him. And he said to me, what are you writing at the moment? And I told him about the story I was then writing. And he said, hang on a second, your detective wouldn't have done that. And why hasn't he got an outside inquiry team doing this? And I don't think your character would have done this. I think he'd have done that. And I thought, wow, this guy's got a really creative mind. And it's something that I've learned subsequently about good homicide detectives, and that they're very methodical people, but at the same time, they're actually very creative and real out-of-the-box thinkers. We became friends, and he rose through the ranks to become Detective Chief Superintendent on the Major Crime Branch. And in 2001, my publishers asked if I'd ever thought of creating a detective as a central character. And I went to Dave Gaylor, and I said, how would you like to be a fictional cop? And he loved it, and he is my real-life Roy Grace, and we work very closely together in the planning and research of my books. I do a lot of talks in prisons to help literacy. It's a shocking fact that in our UK prisons, the average reading age is 9 years old. But it gives me an opportunity to talk to prisoners and see firsthand some of the people that the police deal with. I was at a women's prison doing a talk in the library recently, and there was this quite intelligent, very cut above the average intelligent 55-year-old woman asking me a lot of smart questions about books, which slightly surprised me in the prison environment. And I thought, I wonder what you're in for. And my guess was maybe she'd killed somebody texting or drink driving. Anyway, I got up to her, I mingled with the crowd afterwards, and I never come out and I never say, what have you done? I say, how much longer do you have to go? And she said, 9.5 more years, and it's just not fair. This woman did exactly the same as me in London, and she's only got 6 more years. I said, oh, what brought you in here? She said, well, I poisoned my mother-in-law, the old bag. I said, okay. Well, she said, the thing was, she went into hospital to die, so I embezzled her bank account, and the bloody woman didn't die. And she came home, and I realized she'd find out. So I had to poison her. Then I realized my husband would find out, so I poisoned him too. And it's just not fair. I've got 9.5 more years to go, and this woman did exactly the same as me. She's only got 6. As I was being taken out, I said to the officer who was leading me out, I said, "Did you really do that?" He said, "Oh, yes, sir. Husband was on 3 months on life support. He's got permanent brain damage." And she was just indignant. At the other end of the scale, I asked the governor of our local big prison here in Brighton, Lewis, if he had a career burglar I could talk to for research for one of my books. And he said, "Yeah, we got 1 or 2. And I was given an interview with this character who had 176 previous convictions for burglary. He was 42 years old, gangly, talked like this, looked about 60 because prison life ages people. And he said, "How can I help you, mate?" I said, "I'd love to know your career story." He said, "Well, when I grew up on a poor estate in Brighton," he said, when I was 15, I burgled a neighbor's house. I got 2 years in an approved school. I realized when I came out, you're going to get the same amount of time if you do a poor house or a posh house. So I decided to focus on Brighton's posh houses, Dyke Road Avenue, O4, Rodine. He said, "Oh, the problem is I'm not very good. I'll get caught a lot." He said, "What you always do is, if you do an house, you make sure you leave a back window or back door open." So I was doing this big house in Dyke Road. November, it was dark. I opened the patio doors, and the owners came back. So I legged it out the back. I didn't realize they had a swimming pool, did I? I said, "Do you have a dream?" He said, "Yeah, I'd like to be married again, live in a nice house, have a nice car." It's not going to happen. I said, "Why not?" I said, "You're only 42. He said, "I've got 176 previous. Who's going to give me a decent job?" He said, "You know what? I like it here. I've got telly, the electricity is paid for, I've got my mates, and the grub's good." And that was his life. One of the grimmest jobs the police have to do is delivering what they call the death message. Telling someone that a loved one who left home only a few hours earlier has died in a car crash, or been murdered, or drowned swimming, or dropped dead from a heart attack, and never knowing what reaction they'll get. Sometimes they're attacked and physically assaulted by the grieving relative. But nothing compares to the work done by Sussex Police's Specialist Search Unit. They're trained divers who recover bodies and also forensic evidence from sewers, canals full of broken glass, abandoned bikes. When they're not diving, they have to do the jobs that no one else could cope with, like climbing a tree to recover fragments of bone and brain from somebody who's just blown their head off with a shotgun, or search in really grim places. I'll read you out an email I got sent by their sergeant, Lorna Dennison Wilkins. "Last week, we searched the Hove Domestic Waste and Recycling Depot for a murder weapon. The waste was literally steaming. The methane gas gave us a headache, and there were rats the size of cats running everywhere, which we had to ward off with our rakes. It was almost as if they were waiting for us to tear open the rotting bin bags full of soiled baby nappies, animal food carcasses, and worse, for their next dinner. Apart from the smell and the rats, the worst bit was using the same raking and tearing open of bin bags for 5 hours, which sort of played havoc with your shoulder and back muscles. We also worked through the day with no food. Funnily enough, none of us felt like stopping for lunch." Dave Gaylor, my real-life Roy Grace, told a story in the early days in the police when he had to go and recover the head of a tragic suicide victim who'd laid down on the railway line just north of Brighton. And it was a dark night, raining, and he had to walk up the track. And they'd found the body, but no head. And he said, "I suddenly saw a pair of eyes peering at me out of a bush." He said, "I didn't want to have it looking at me while I recovered it, so I went around the back of the bush, and it was a prickly gorse bush. And I was literally fighting this bush for the head. And I didn't know what to do quite when I got it out, so out of respect, I took off my jacket and wrapped it up. And I put it in the boot of my car. As I drove to Brighton Mortuary, every time I went round a corner or braked, I could hear this bump, 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 bump. The coping mechanism of the police, as with all emergency service workers, is gallows humor. Without it, they would go insane. I spent a day with the Sussex Police helicopter, and one of their roles is once a week they have to do a check beneath the cliffs at Beachy Head, which very sadly is the second most popular suicide spot in the world. And we were flying there very low down, very close to the cliff, and this police officer had the door open, was peering down, and said to me, you know, you'd be surprised at the number of people we recover at the bottom who've got chalk under their fingernails. I said, you mean they've changed their mind halfway down? And she said, yes. And she said, I'm thinking of starting a bungee jumping business at the top. I'm going to call it Try Before You Die. Few professions can really make a difference to people's lives, but very often police officers can. I was talking to a 25-year-old officer in Brighton recently. I said, how are you getting on? How are you enjoying it? He said, well, my first 2 years, he said, I was on response, fantastic, you know, ripping around on blues and twos. You don't know what's going to happen in 5 minutes' time. Then they put me on the street team, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be dealing with all the dregs of society. He said, within a year and a half, my whole view changed. He said, I have a guy that I arrested on a drugs charge. I helped get him into rehab, and I kept in really close contact with him. He's now been clean for 2 years. He's working in a rehab center himself, helping other drug users, and I believe I played a part in turning his life around. A former chief of the Metropolitan Police some while ago said that a major role of the police is as human garbage collectors. I think they are very much more than that. I believe the police are a major and vital part of the glue that keeps civilized life together. Thank you very much.